Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. In a new initiative to attract capable minds, the government has opened up senior level bureaucratic posts for talented and motivated people who have never taken a UPSC exam. The government is looking for 10 outstanding individuals, even from the private sector, with expertise in the areas of revenue, financial services, economic affairs, agriculture, cooperation and farmers' welfare, road transport and highways, shipping, environment, forests and climate change, new and renewable energy, civil aviation and commerce. Those selected will be appointed as joint secretary level officers in different departments. Joint secretaries are at a crucial level of senior management in the Government of India and lead policy making as well as implementation of various programs and schemes of the department assigned to them. They report to the secretary, additional secretary in the Ministry of Department and are normally appointed from all India services like the IAS, IPS, IFS and other allied services. The period of contract will be for 3 years from the date of commencement of service, extendable to up to 5 years depending upon performance. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze if lateral entry in bureaucracy is a good or bad idea. Joining me on the program today are Vivek, Katju, former ambassador, Sushil Chandra Tripathi, former Principal Secretary, Uttar Pradesh, and Sanjay Kumar, Senior Director, Deloitte. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Let me begin the program by going across to Sanjay Kumar from Deloitte first and try and understand and put the things into perspective for us, because Deloitte has worked on a report as well. Mr. Kumar, as far as lateral entry in bureaucracy is concerned, is it a good or a bad idea?
Oh, it's certainly a good idea, and I think the government has made a very, very positive move on this, and this will induct a talent, this will bring a customer focus, and this will bring the subject matter experts into the various, the areas where the government intends to hire joint secretaries.
And what is the criteria really for this lateral entry?
Well, the criteria is that they should have put in about 15 years of the expert service in that area, and then they should be 40 years of age. So I suppose the government is going to get a lot more talent on this. It will also enthuse a number of people who are aspiring to work in the public sector, who are getting a hands-on chance to work in the public sector. They may have worked in an organization which is business, or could be in an NGO, but this will give them certainly a chance to work in the areas of public policy and will bring the customer focus, which is so direly needed in the government. The government it is not that this has not happened earlier. There were a couple of maybe 3-4 times that the government brought in experts, as recent as Mr. R.V. Shah. But earlier, Dr. Manmohan Singh was there, and after that, I recall also Mr. Montek Ahluwalia, who was inducted as Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Commerce. So, but this is the first time the government has done it on a systematic basis and tried to induct 10 persons in various ministries. Of course, one can say that this may be too few, but nonetheless, this is certainly a good move of the government.
Sure. Mr. Tripathi, as far as our experience in the past is concerned, what has our experience been with dealing with lateral entry?
You see, we have had several kinds of lateral entries, and the famous ones are the ones that he has mentioned. Both Dr. Manmohan Singh, Montek Ahluwalia, they joined government as part of lateral entry process. So it is not that this is happening for the first time, and they were quite successful. In fact, Montek Ahluwalia went on to become Secretary and Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission, and Dr. Manmohan Singh went on to become Secretary, Minister and Prime Minister. There is no issue. Government must have access to best talent. The issue is who should do the selection. Now, there is a constitutional body, UPSC, meant for this purpose. So, if UPSC does the selection, it will carry conviction. Then secondly, as you have read, that it is a contract for 3 to 5 years, 3 years extendable to 5 years. In my opinion, it should be minimum 5 years, extendable by another 5 years or 10 years, because at joint secretary level, people of organized services also stay for 10 to 12 years. It's a very long grade.
No, since you brought up joint secretary, I'm sorry to cut you short. What is the role of a joint secretary in a department or in a ministry?
Joint secretary is kind of division head, because secretary deals with many issues. So, joint secretary is the level, senior management level, where the issues are analyzed and properly presented to either to secretary or minister or to the cabinet. In fact, all the cabinet notes are signed by joint secretary. So, in the working of Government of India, joint secretary is kind of pivot, and he is a very important person. He stays normally for 5 years. Secretaries get transferred in 1 year, 2 years or retire, but joint secretary normally stays for 5 years. So, he is in charge of that division dealing with whatever subjects there are, and therefore, he is supposed to be the person that the minister and secretary depend on for getting feedback on issues relating to that division. So, I am saying that 10 years, otherwise the person coming from private sector will not really be a serious or very good candidate if he comes there only for 3 years. So, he has to make a career here. And next point which I wish to make is that it would be better if he comes as an advisor like Montek Singh Ahluwalia and Dr. Manmohan Singh, because if he comes as a joint secretary of course is an important position, but his work is mainly secretariat work, and people who have not had background of the government, and government does not mean only the buildings and the files. Government is right down from village panchayat to the Rashtrapati, and if he is not fully aware of the various wings of the government and how they collaborate and cooperate, then he'll get bogged down in the files. So, it would be more useful if he comes an advisor and he stays there 5-10 years, and as an advisor they go up, become secretary and ministers also.
Right.
So, that would be a better way of utilizing a domain knowledge and experts talent, rather than making him bogged down in the secretariat work, where his juniors like under secretary, deputy secretary, section officers may take him for a ride if he is not fully aware of the working of the government.
Talking about the working of the government, Ambassador, how difficult is it for a person who's worked in the private sector all his life to make the switch to the government side, because it's a different ball game altogether, isn't it?
I think in some ways it's a different ball game, in other ways it is not. And I, for one, don't see any problems in a lateral entry to the position of Joint Secretary. But I endorse entirely that the selection process has to be manifestly politically neutral. Because if the suspicion arises that it is not politically neutral, then the entire process will be stigmatized. And one possibility, the obvious possibility, which strikes me also as Mr. Tripathi with his vast experience, and he's been Petroleum Secretary in the government, which was a very technical position, is that the UPSC is the constitutionally mandated body for this purpose. Second, my feeling is that any person who's taken in will have to be given a course or some kind of a training capsule to make him aware of the different functions of government and how a government functions. And that is for a person of 40 with experience, because that is the age which our colleague on the panel has said that it should not be a very difficult thing. Third, in principle, of course, lateral entries have taken place in the past, and in principle there can't be an objection. And to my mind, and this is what I was submitting to Tripathi sir before we came in, that lateral entry has also, in a manner of speaking, taken place from the government to other organizations. Yeah. After all, if an IAS officer can go without any domain knowledge and head the Air India, or head public sector undertakings. That is also lateral entry. We in the Foreign Service are used to lateral entries. Now it is less, but there was a time when our ambassadors used to be public men. That was lateral entry too. So lateral entries have taken place, and it is better if there is a full scheme. But the crucial thing will be what will be the modalities for implementation, and they must be manifestly clear and sustainable so that they inspire confidence.
Sure. You know, Mr. Kumar, that having been said, what do you believe is the biggest challenge for lateral entry, and how do we ensure transparency as the previous two speakers have spoken about?
I certainly echo the sentiments of the transparency in recruitment, because as Mr. Sushil Chandra said that it would, and also endorsed by Ambassador Katju, that it would bring the conviction, it would bring the stamp, because UPSC is a constitutional body, and all the recruitments to the higher echelons of government are done from there. Having said that, whoever comes here, they will have to have a kind of little transformation in terms of having the public sector values, and that's a very important thing. I mean, I have no difficulty in saying that many of these institutions, and this is, I can cite to, because that's my, the first private sector that I am working with is Deloitte, and I find that they have a very, very strict anti-corruption and transparency and risk assessment programs and learnings, and typically almost like 40 hours of learning every year one has to do compulsorily. So I have no difficulty that the persons who will be recruited may come from similar organizations, and they would have the public sector values, or they may imbibe that without any difficulty, having had some training somewhat as I just mentioned. Having said that, also that they need to undergo a little bit of transformation in terms of the points that they would be pursuing, which it may be client focused, it may not be a national policy level. To that extent, which Mr. Katju mentioned, is about a small capsule of training, and which will help them in understanding what is going to be the remit of the work. But frankly, I do not agree with one comment of Mr. Tripathi that they can be advisors. And I have seen in the government, I was an ex-IRS, I'm an ex-IRS officer, and I have worked in various ministries. And what I've seen that the role of the advisor many times are not really implemented, because ultimately they are not in executive position. And that being an executive role as a joint secretary would help the person to bring the kind of transformation that the country is looking forward to. I'm not saying that the officers who are presently they're doing some marvelous work and the government is using them for this, but the entire intention behind inducting some of the persons from private sector will be to make best use of their expertise and the transformation that they can bring it, because they are coming from an absolutely different experience and the domain. Okay. So I personally feel that they will be able to adjust quite well, provided the selection is through a very transparent process, and all these issues that I mentioned, wherever they are working, is already part of their rigmarole.
Sure. Okay, points taken. So basically, all three panelists are in agreement that transparency is the key as far as lateral entry is concerned. Let's move on from there now. Mr. Tripathi, why do we need lateral entry? I mean, just for argument's sake, aren't the officers that are already there, people who go through training, people who pass examinations and eventually get there, aren't they capable enough in doing the same job? What is it that the private sector is going to bring to the table? What are they going to do differently?
You see, administration is becoming more and more complex now. Gone are the days when it was a very simple general administration, just maintenance of peace and order. Now, government is involved in development of all sectors of economy, society and polity. And therefore, you need, the new knowledge, new talent which keeps coming in. And of course, on one side of the story is that people who are selected at a young stage of 21, 25, they should be given training. But that is not enough. They should be given training, but what happens in government is they get training for one subject and get posted to another area. Very often it happens that person has come back with a very specialized training, but he doesn't get posting suitable to the training that he has received, and he is sent to a totally different jobs because he remains a generalist officer, and therefore it is expected that he can do any other job also, and depending on the convenience of the political masters he gets transferred. Whereas a specialist, because he is a specialist, either he is useful to the job relating to that specialization, or he is not useful at all. So to transfer him is difficult. So that is the other reason. But nevertheless, howsoever training you may give to a journalist officer, he cannot be up to date in the specialized knowledge. And therefore, it is good to have people with expertise in that area, having domain knowledge. And now, you see, the world has become a small place. What is applicable in one part of the world can also be applied in your part, which perhaps a person who has been working only in district and the states may not be equally aware as a person who has worked in that particular specialization. So it is a good, innovation, good practice. I think it should be accepted. But as has been pointed out, the selection process must be transparent and fair.
Sure. Ambassador, as far as these areas are concerned, 10 areas have been identified, or 10 ministries or 10 departments. Why these 10 ministries? Shouldn't be right in the scope? Shouldn't it be made all encompassing?
I think this perhaps may be a pilot project. And the ministries chosen have no doubt been carefully selected, because in some of these, the complexities today within the country and in the international system, say commercial activities, are becoming so many and so intricate that it does require domain knowledge. And therefore, it will be a good thing to get domain knowledge within the workings of government. But there are a couple of aspects here. I think while looking at this selection process, it will have to take care of the fact that the people who come in are able to have the patience to adjust to a totally different system of functioning. Because government imposes its own limitations. What is feasible in a public sector, in a private company, howsoever large it may be, and quite frankly, some of these multinationals are enormous bureaucracies. We all know, and large Indian companies are bureaucracies, but they function differently. The other thing is, and this is, to my mind, it's always been there, is that a company's whole approach is profit. Government's approach is never that. And therefore, that is also a fundamental transition that a public sector, that a private sector person has to make while working in government.
That having been said, interestingly, you came to that, Ambassador. I'll let you complete your point. But someone from a particular domain, with domain knowledge, with domain expertise, comes in and takes over as a joint secretary in a ministry. What's to say that he might not do something that may benefit some other company?
No, I think I would like to assume that people chosen for these jobs will not fall prey to the temptation that you are saying, that we have to assume that there will be people who will be dedicated people, and that certainly there will be firewalls and enough mechanisms to ensure that these kind of activities don't take place. And for that matter, even in the bureaucracy, these kinds of activities take place. So let us assume that that is not so. But it is this transition from profit to governance. And let me just add one thing. There is a historical background to this. When the East India Company became the administrators of India, then it took them almost 3 decades to make that transition, because their traders were not used to governance, and governance is a totally different animal. So I'm not saying it can't be done, but therefore the selection process has to be extremely careful. Domain knowledge, yes, but that will have to be really, it will have to be ensured that these aspects are built in, so that perhaps some kind of, I won't use the word psychological evaluation, but I'm sure that when companies hire people,
Rigorous
they also
evaluation.
have systems of evaluating whether a person will be able to do this or fit into a new environment.
Sure. Yeah, yes, Mr. Tripathi, you want to add something?
Therefore, I am suggesting that he must think of a career here. It should not be that he comes here for 3 years and then he makes contacts here and goes back and uses those contacts for his private affairs or private business. He must, because you see, the value system is quite different between government and private sector. And therefore, the person who comes here must be selected. It is difficult to find out what his value system is, and therefore there should be a period of probation, and thereafter he should think of a career in government.
Okay. Yes, Ambassador.
Value systems, unfortunately, I'm sure you'll agree with me, sir, are transiting very quickly.
Okay, moving ahead now. You know, Mr. Kumar, you've seen this on both sides. You've been with the government, you're with the private sector. Now, what was most difficult or most easy for you really to make the change?
Well, let me tell you that, typically I don't see there is a much change. It all depends on the organization that you join, certainly. Many times, people say that the companies overly focus on the profit, certainly, that's their job. But they also have an attention to the public policy, and I did mention about the public values. Having said that, certainly the emphasis of the person who joins there from the private sector can be, would have to undergo a change, and that will be a task before whoever does so, and how quickly he adjusts into his new role, and how quickly he understands the nitty-gritty of the government functioning, because everything said and done, the government is like a behemoth, and there are multiple issues. You have the parliamentary committee, you have the CVC, you have the procurement is not as easy as one thinks. So all these things will bring a lot of challenge to the person who is there, and the Joint Secretary will have some of these, because being is an executive post. But it all depends on the person, and I'm sure as and when they select the person, they will make the right choice, because the person has to be chosen very carefully, because he's going at a very, very senior position of a Joint Secretary, and he would be having many responsibilities, and he would have to demonstrate, on his shoulder, that's a big responsibility, that he's capable, and so that the program continues. As Mr. Katju said, that this seems to be the first experiment, and I do feel that it is in some manner, because they have taken up only 10 of those departments of league ministries, but they have taken 10 ministries, so, and which is a substantial one. So The challenge will be on the person who joins, and I suppose they do the selection properly.
Sure. Okay, talking about the person itself, you know, position, of course, is a senior position, but what about the money involved? Because government positions at the end of the day aren't lucrative enough as far as if you compare it to the private sector. So are you going to get that many takers for this kind of a position, Mr. Tripathi?
That is my worry and my concern, that if you are suggesting that a person comes for 3 years only, he is not thinking of a career here, then who will come? Because the money is not very attractive here, and he may not understand fully the working of the government. A joint secretary, when he prepares a note, he consults all the concerned ministries of the government of India. He consults all the state governments who may be affected by the issue which is being discussed, and he has to consult them. He has to, pursue those matters. A private sector executive is used to a different milieu altogether. Therefore, he may come here, he may get frustrated also, and then after 3 years he may want to go back. So therefore, it should be that the person must think of this lateral entry as a career, and that can be, if he comes here for minimum 10 years, then he understands the government, he contributes to the working of the government, to the issues and to policy making, and then if he is really useful and he contributes so well, like Mantek Ahluwalia, Dr. Manmohan Singh, he can become secretary and later on minister or anything else. But if he comes only for a short period of time, he says that he wants to get an experience of government, then it is neither worthwhile for him nor for the government.
You know, since it's the flavor of the season, would there be reservation in this as well?
Well, that issue has been raised. So if it doesn't come in a pattern, in an organized fashion, then there will be some who will raise that question and the whole scheme may be torpedoed.
Sure. Ambassador, close the show for us with your concluding
I don't
remarks.
see anything wrong in having reservations here too. It will have to be skillfully managed, but I'm sure we'll find enough people in the private sector who will fit from the reserve categories, who will fit the bill. So that is my view. Second, I think we are now perhaps exploring a new bureaucratic structure. After all, the structure that we've inherited is still a colonial structure.
Yes.
There hasn't been much change. I regret to say, after 70 years, the whole pattern of recruitment is essentially the same as it was during the Raj. So, this revolving door, which is there in some countries, and their bureaucracies function. After all, the American system have these short-term things, and they work. So, we should keep an open mind, see how this functions, but at the end of the day, I will come to that point on which I think all three of us agreed, that the key to this entire process will lie in selecting the right people in a manner which is manifestly transparent.
Sure. All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's emerging from this discussion is the fact that it's a good thing having lateral entry in the bureaucracy, but transparency and the selection process is key for it to work. That's it on this edition of The Big Picture. See you again next time.